Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome again back to another episode of PLA with myself, Nick and Bruno. We've got one question that we'll be dealing with today from Caitlin. So both guys will just add their views to that question. Basically, Caitlin is asking whether, there's a property that's been sold with an existing lease in place. And the question is, with the new owner to take over the lease, is the new owner bound by the terms of the lease agreement relating to a property practitioner managing the property for a monthly fee, So the lease agreement makes no mention of the agreement becoming binding on the successor's title. So maybe here I think it's more. We can also throw in perhaps the Huur Gaat Voor Koop, and then just look maybe quickly what that does mean, and just touch quickly on that and whether or not in these such cases we can allow the purchaser to cancel the lease agreement, etc.
Sure.
Okay, Bruno, shall I start with Huur Gaat Voor Koop?
Go for it. You pronounce it better than I do.
Okay, perfect. So it's a great question. And there's a couple of different relationships, which is where questions like this come into play. And it's important to understand the different relationships. So what our listener says is the property's been sold and there was an existing lease agreement in respect to this particular premises. All right. So you have a landlord and the tenants who have entered into this particular lease agreement. And obviously now the landlord sells his property to someone else. All right. And so this landlord is now going to fall away and they aren't entitled to any rental anymore. Now, in South African law, we have a principle called Huur Gaat Voor Koop. Okay, now all this means is that the lease agreement, if follows, is ahead of the sale. Okay, that's basically what it means. And what that means is when you are an owner of a property and you have a lease agreement in respect of a particular property and you sell that property, the person who purchases the property automatically steps into the shoes, of the seller of the property. So, and this particular principle only exists in respect of lease agreements. Okay, there's not other lease or other agreements in law that this particularly applies. Okay, this is a common law principle in South African law that says, as a landlord, if you are now purchasing this property, you're going to step into the shoes of the old landlord. What that means is you have to now uphold all the obligations and you have all the rights of the previous owner of the property as a landlord. So you can receive rental, but you still have to give undisturbed use and enjoyment of the particular premises. The reason this principle has come into our law is obviously to protect tenants in the circumstances. You don't want new owners of properties simply buying up properties and then kicking out everyone on the premises when a tenant has a right, provided that they comply with the terms of the lease agreements to the occupation of that property. So the principle of Huur Gaat Voor Koop protects the tenants in the circumstances to make sure they don't lose their home arbitrarily just because the landlord decides to sell their property. Okay.
Sure.
So that's the general principle. That's the first relationship that exists here. Then there's the relationship of the agent. Okay, and where a lot of people and a lot of lease agreements get this wrong is they start to include provisions relating to the agent inside the lease agreement. It's important to remember that the lease agreement is a contract only between a landlord and their tenant. The agent doesn't have a part of this particular lease agreement. The agent has functions, but it's not a part of the lease. And you'll see a lot of lease agreements do include agent provisions and clauses about commission payable in terms of the lease. It's actually not supposed to be there at all. That lease agreement has nothing to do with the agent. And even if the agent signs it, there's certain lease agreements that let the agent sign. They're not a party to that agreement in any particular way. The signature by the agent is arbitrary in the circumstances. So that's the first relationship. Then there's a relationship between the agent and the landlord in the circumstances. And I think, Bruno, you can take over from there.
Sure. So exactly what, off the back of what Nick said, the relationship sits with the landlord and the estate agent. So there's already a bunch of conversations we can have around estate agent mandates and how they design and what you're actually supposed to be paying, what you're not supposed to be paying. whether you should agree. So most amounts, for example, are payable on a monthly basis. So you take a certain percentage, and as the tenant's on the property, and the agent administers the property, and this would normally be the administrative commission that they're getting, the management commission, as it were. You might be able to pay this on a monthly basis. Question is, that specific mandate, which should actually fall outside the lease agreement, because as Nick pointed out, it's two separate agreements. If you try to throw everything into one, it's not a problem, but the courts have often divided the agreements up and say, great, but there's actually two agreements in one. This is how we approach one. This is how we approach the other. And the thing with Huur Gaat Voor Koop is it's specific to landlord-tenant relationship. As he mentioned, nothing to do with the agent. And so the agent has to have its own agreement with the landlord, and this agreement you'll find is either going to be on a month-to-month basis or fixed term basis, right? Now, why I'm mentioning all of this is because it kind of ties into here, going, how should people actually approach transactions like this? I'm selling a property. I've got an agent. He rents the property out, He rather manages the rental of the property. I find a buyer. I go to the buyer and say, oh, and you know what? I've got great tenants. Buy the property from me. Buy as an investor, buys the property. Everyone thinks that they're happy, right? Now, what will happen? As Nick mentioned, now the relationship with the tenant remains. So the new owner steps into my shoes as a seller and he manages the tenant, but the estate agent doesn't. So the new owner can say, sorry, I don't want this agent anymore. You're fired. I'm managing myself. What consequences do I have as a seller now? Because now the agent's going to come knocking on my door saying, all right, great. So we entered into an agreement for a fixed term, or I discounted my introduction fee on condition that, this would last for X period of time. So as a seller, there's going to be consequences if you don't actually understand what mandate your estate agent has. So that's the first thing to bear in mind, please, guys. As a buyer, obviously there you're a lot safer, but remember, things can be agreed to contractually. So the lease agreement between landlord and tenant has nothing to do with you, except that you take over those specific rights, but nothing with the estate agent. But now if you're entering into any other form of agreement, let's say it's an offer to purchase because you're buying the property, in that offer to purchase, you could very well be indemnifying the seller for any disbursements, anything towards the rental agents. So a smart seller would say, oh, I'm bound by 12 months, but I really want to sell the property. I'm putting it in my sale agreement, which is binding between me as a seller, you as a purchaser, and I'm putting it in there that you should be using that agent. But don't worry, if you don't, you're going to indemnify me, because if that agent sues me for commission because you terminated his mandate early, tell you what, you're going to cover me. So but just bear in mind, it's not to say that certain relationships don't apply. It's really to kind of understand if they apply automatically in our law, and if not, contractually, how you should probably make provision for them and what to look out for.
Yeah, and I got to say, we've got a lot of estate agents who watch the show and take advice from us. It's one of the reasons that we, sort of say, as an agent, you really should have a separate mandate apart from your lease agreement, because you need to consider, as an agent, if you've got a year-long lease agreement and you just shove an agency clause in the lease agreement, you're probably not going to cater for a circumstance where there is perhaps a change of the ownership of a particular property. And then what happens to your commission in the circumstance? As Bruno said, they're going to sever it out, because even if your clauses are in the lease agreement, that's not an agreement between the three of you. That can only exist between the two parties. And the court's going to look at the actual relationship between the landlord or ex-landlord in the circumstance and you as the agent, and then try and apply whatever clauses there are. So if you don't have a separate mandate that deals with circumstances like this, there is a chance that you're going to lose out in the circumstances. But certainly for the purchase of the property, there's no obligation to continue with the agency once you purchase that property.
Sure.
Yeah. Cool. Well, there you go. Thank you very much, guys. some valuable quick lessons there when it comes to property management, especially when it comes to that there are agents involved with the mandate, and then looking into the lease agreement. If there's going to be a property sale that's going to be taking place, one just needs to be careful what happens to the lease agreement, and a lot of things to bear in mind. So one just needs to be careful to make sure that they just always aware of what happens to their rights with the continuation of the lease. And then, yeah, so thank you guys. And for more on this sort of topic, I know people like to take interest in it, in the Huur Gaat Voor Koop. Please do take a look at episode 69, and it's a lengthier video there where you can listen some more on that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, guys.
Thanks,
All right.
guys. Good week.
Thanks, guys.